Pulling off a successful jailbreak requires courage, cunning, and more than a little luck. Jails and prisons are built for security and staffed by people who are paid to make sure you don't leave until they say so. However, that doesn't stop people who possess none of the aforementioned qualities from taking their chances in the hopes of an early and unauthorized release. They're the ones who end up right back in the cell, with time slapped onto their sentences for their trouble, but at least they do us the service of providing a good laugh. These are prison escapes that failed horribly, attempted by people who really should have just stayed put. In early 2017, Logan County, Oklahoma inmate Travion Barber made a daring but ill-advised attempt at escape when he was allowed to use an inmate bathroom that's actually private. Guards didn't think much of it when he was in the bathroom for quite some time, but a red flag or two was raised when he came out, as he was inexplicably covered in blood. Upon inspecting the bathroom, guards found several ceiling tiles had been dislodged, laying in pieces on the floor. Barber claimed that the ceiling simply collapsed on top of him while he was doing his business, and that he'd sustained his injuries while helpfully trying to repair the damage. But guards quickly formulated another theory, that Barber had stood on the sink to reach the 8-foot-high ceiling in a bid to crawl up inside and try to find a way out. Unfortunately for Barber, the ceiling was designed to prevent this very thing, as its framework was specifically built to be unable to support an adult's weight. His hopes of freedom came crashing down along with the rest of him, and he'll have to serve out his 2-year sentence for false impersonation, along with extra time he's likely to be slapped with for attempted escape and destruction of property. A pair of young crooks were having a bad day at their New Zealand court appearances in 2009. One had just been handed a 2-year sentence for assault, and the other was in court for a parole violation along with fresh charges of auto theft. The two were handcuffed together by chance while waiting, and when they saw a chance, they made a decision to make a break for it and figure out their handcuff situation later. However, they only got about 10 seconds to think it over. They stumbled and got pepper sprayed, but got up and continued to run. Then, with a court deputy chasing them and the pepper spray undoubtedly causing problems, the two failed to get themselves on the same side of a light pole that was in their path. One went one way, the other went another, and the two criminals wrapped around the pole and cartoonishly slammed into each other's faces. They stayed on the ground for longer than their brief flight lasted, and were eventually hauled to their feet and led back to their cells to await new escape charges. In 1989, drug kingpin Benjamin Barry Kramer was serving a life sentence at Metropolitan Correctional Center in Miami, one of the main prisons housing Florida's many major drug offenders in the 80s. This kingpin had apparently watched one too many episodes of Miami Vice, because he attempted an escape method that nobody would ever expect to work outside of a TV show or Hollywood action movie. During yard time one morning, stunned inmates watched in disbelief as a helicopter lowered itself into the exercise yard, a yard that was designed specifically for escape risks, like those serving life sentences. Kramer grabbed onto one of its skis and was ready to board, but one of the chopper's propellers came into contact with the wire atop the yard's wall, and down it went in a dramatic crash. Both Kramer with a broken ankle and the pilot with much more serious injuries to his head, neck, and back had to be extracted from the wreckage by fire crews. Kramer's escape plan was foiled, but he did get to ride in a helicopter that day, along with his pilot, to the hospital. An unidentified man in Brazil had the misfortune not only of his escape attempt failing, but of looking really silly in the attempt and allowing the whole thing to be caught on video. The man was waiting in a holding cell to be booked on charges of robbing a jewelry store, something which he apparently wasn't really looking forward to. Rather than face justice, he opted to try the Winnie the Pooh method of exit by attempting to squeeze through a hole in a door that was obviously much too small for him. As if getting stuck in this precarious position weren't enough, he had stripped down to nothing but his purple underwear so that his clothes wouldn't get caught on the opening. Unfortunately, that just meant that his skin and bones got caught on the opening instead. After a long and painful struggle with chuckling firefighters wielding power tools, the man was eventually freed from his self-imposed trap, but not from jail. He'll probably be there for some time. In another case of genius escape plotting out of Brazil, William Alves was working in the kitchen in a city jail in the country's northeastern region when he concocted a brilliant plan. He would simply crawl into one of the kitchen's trash containers, cover himself up with some food and scraps, and wait until the receptacle was picked up for disposal, as they were every day. It actually doesn't seem like that far-fetched a plan, but there was a slight problem. The trash receptacle in question was not on the large side. It was in fact just barely big enough to hold Alves. Even though he managed to squeeze himself all the way inside, which must have been next to impossible, there was barely enough room left over to cover himself up with anything. And even if that part of the plan had worked, it's ridiculous to think that maintenance staff wouldn't question why this medium-sized trash can mysteriously would weigh as much as a full-grown man. The ploy was quickly discovered and Alves was hauled back to his cell, presumably trying to play the whole thing off as a joke all the while. If there's a theme to this list, it's that Brazilian prisoners are fond of trying to escape incarceration using methods that are elaborate, silly, or both. In the case of Ronaldo Silva, it's definitely both. Silva was awaiting trial for drug trafficking when he instructed his wife to bring him several items during a visit. Somehow she was able to pass him one of her dresses, a pair of high heels, nail polish, makeup, and a wig, and that's when Silva put his plan into action. As you may have guessed, the burly would-be escapee shaved his arms and legs, did his nails and makeup, threw on the dress, wigs, and heels, and simply walked right out past the guards. Unbelievably, this part of the plan actually succeeded, but a sharp-eyed cop patrolling the street outside the prison noticed that this woman had an odd manner of walking, because for all of his attention to detail, Silva had not taken the time to teach himself to walk properly in heels. The cop followed him to a bus station, where accomplices were waiting to pick him up, but he never made it to the rendezvous. The cop managed to take him into custody and drag him back to jail. No pun intended. In 2011, guards on duty at the Osceola County Jail in Florida were startled by a loud banging noise of indeterminate origin at around 4 o'clock one morning. After investigating all of the cells without finding the source of the noise, they checked the security cameras that look in on the higher security inmates. One of those was Hector Luis Campos, and guards knew something was amiss when they noticed that Campos had covered up his camera with a sheet. They suspected an escape attempt, and they were almost right. Campos had apparently talked himself into believing he could become the Hulk because he was busy literally punching away at the bricks of his cell. Pieces of brick, mortar, and paint were found on the floor and in the toilet, and Campos was sporting a battered and swollen right hand. It was a determined attempt to become the first inmate to ever punch his way to freedom, but the additional time that his escape charges will bring will probably hurt Campos even more than that hand. Inmate Orville Morris turned up missing from Westville Correctional Facility in Indiana in May 2017. The working theory was that he had gotten out in a truck, but guards were busy searching the facility and its 100 acres for any clue as to how he might have pulled off his escape. While searching the pallet shop where he worked, they came upon their first real evidence in the form of a strange noise coming from the ceiling above the shop. As it turned out, Morris had never really escaped at all. He decided to make his attempt on a Friday, climbed up into the ceiling, and then apparently couldn't figure out what to do next. He sat perched among the building's ductwork for the entire weekend, while prison officials searched the grounds, but couldn't keep quiet while guards conducted their search of his work area. In prison since 2014 for robbery, Morris had been due for release in 2019, but thanks to his long weekend, he signed himself up for a more extended stay. In April 2017, at Virginia Henrico's Jail East, 2 inmates, one in jail for grand larceny, the other on meth charges, decided to put their escape plan into action after apparently plotting it for some time. They made detailed drawings of the jail's exterior and somehow managed to get into the exercise yard after lights out. They knew that motion detector lights would quickly alert guards to their presence, so they only had a limited amount of time to sprint across the yard, scale the security fence, and navigate the razor wire at the top using extra clothes as a buffer. The weak link in their bold plan was that both of these inmates were in terrible shape. Guards noted that it's apparent on the video that the run across the yard took some of the wind out of them, and the climb up the tall fence sapped most of what strength they had left. By the time they found themselves dealing with the razor wire, all they managed to accomplish was cutting themselves up so badly that they knew the escape plot was a bust. Out of breath and bleeding profusely, the two simply sat down and waited to be caught. An inmate at Sydney, Australia's Silverwater Correctional Complex for women wasn't so lucky as the previous pair in her confrontation with razor wire. The woman sized up the security fence at the maximum security facility, decided she could take it on, and attempted to make it over in broad daylight. However, not only did she fail to clear the razor wire at the top, she actually became stuck in it. It took hours for about 24 prison guards, paramedics, a fire and rescue team, and a cherry picker operator to extract the hapless woman from the deadly razor wire. She was treated for multiple cuts and lacerations, presumably slapped with an escape charge, and became an unwilling teacher of a lesson that all prison inmates should be taught on the first day. You won't beat the razor wire, so it's best to not even consider it.